pulled an easy key on something obvious and made a mild correction. Now we have to do something more challenging. We're going to pull a skin key, one of the most common operations in color grading, but also potentially one of the more challenging ones as well. It is very common, as the skin tones are often considered the most important colors in the image. We want to make these skin tones pop, so we'll have to qualify them first. Now, we can do this either way with the eyedropper or the manual controls. I'm going to do mine manually just because I'm used to doing that, so I'll put highlight on. The skin tones lie around red and yellow, they're in the orange part of the spectrum. And it looks like we're more towards yellow here, so I can just squeeze those tones out. Now we've got noisy shadows in here, very common. Shadows and very dark regions, they tend to contain pixels of more or less every hue at very low saturation. I've said this before. So what we can do is we can bring up our low saturation and low luminance in order to squeeze out the chattery bits. Now, a bit of a trick is to actually use left soft, or low soft I should say, before we bring low up. Now the problem here is if we bring up low, we're going to start to get rid of the highlights on the hand, which I don't want, although we can fix that later on with the controls we're going to cover in this video. So now, let's see. This key isn't going to be perfect, which is what matte finesse is about. Okay, so reasonably okay. We've got chatter, we've got noise, we've got a few bits we don't want over here, we've got things we need to fill in here. A good use case for the matte finesse controls. So if you have experience with green screen keying, you might recognize a number of the controls down here, but we're going to go through them all and why you might want to use them. So pre-filter. It's not always used. It's primarily for dealing with footage that is heavily compressed. Things like blocky artifacts, they can interfere with a key. If I pull this up, it's going to try and smooth out the colors before we key them. You can see as I drag this up, the blocky chattering gets a little bit better. And it's because it's just dealing with the compression inherent in the footage. So I can just bring that up a little bit if I think that helps. I might leave that at 0 and come back to that later on. Next is clean black. To understand this, we'll want to change the way we view our key. If I click on this icon down here, I can view the highlight in black and white mode, and what we're essentially seeing here is the alpha channel. Everything under a white pixel is qualified, is within our qualification. Everything under a black pixel is disqualified, is not in our qualification. What we want to try and do is get as solid a white shape as we can for the face and the skin tones, and get rid of all of the white noise in the darker regions. So we've got some white specks in the background. Keep an eye on those as I drag this slider up. See how we're beginning to get rid of all those? So clean black takes white specks on a black background and fills them in with black and makes them disappear. It's used to get rid of little bits of the background that creep into the key. Now we need to be careful with this because it can also eat into the edges of the key. Now clean white, this is a lot like clean black, but it fills in small black gaps on a white background. If I drag clean white up, you'll see that our key becomes a lot more solid. But also this stray region here, we're going to have to garbage map that out later, is getting more solid as well. So I'm going to bring key white up, try and get rid of the kind of black noise on the inside. Now next we have black and white clip. So black clip. You might remember this one if you work with green screen. Black clip raises the value of what we consider to be black. If black is usually 0, then dragging the black clip up to 10 will tell Resolve that anything under 10% brightness should be considered pure black instead. It's a bit like bringing the black levels up on a histogram in Photoshop to increase the contrast of an image. If we have troublesome edges or areas of low opacity in our key that we want to eliminate, we can bring black clip up. What this is going to do is going to hit this grayish area here. It's going to hit parts of the hair as well. So if I bring up black clip, you can see that's getting kind of squeezed out. The hair, the chattery bits in the hair are also getting squeezed out as well. I think I want the hair to kind of be included in here, so I don't want black clip to go too far down this time. Then we have white clip. It works in much the same logic. If white is 100, then if we bring white clip down to 80, anything above 80 is considered pure white. It's going to make our grayer areas brighter and more solid. I need to be careful because I'll start picking up the noise in the background again. So I'm going to bring that down until I get a bit more out of the hair, but I don't want too much in the background. Well, actually, I'm not that bothered. I'll garbage map this out later. So now we can still see it's quite chattery and noisy, so we've still got some work to do, but the head is, or the face even, is much more solid. So next we have blur radius. Now, blur radius is the hero of matte finesse alongside noise reduction. This will blur the key, and we almost always want to blur the key to hide hard edges. Hard edges tend to make the shape of a qualification obvious, ergo we blur them out. We almost always use blur, and before we go any further, I'm going to go back to seeing the highlight mode normally, and then I'm going to drag this up a good healthy amount, although I do want to be careful of halos on the edge of the cheek there as I blur this out. You can see that as I blur, it's going to blur the inside and the outside of the shape. And if I blur it too much, I'm going to get a halo around the edge here. But the next tool can help us with that. I want to blur this here. And now we're going to move on to in-out ratio. In-out ratio is used to further refine our blur and tends to be used whenever we use blur, which is quite a lot. This setting lets us move the blur in and out of the edge of our initial key. It's kind of difficult to visualize from the description alone, so what we'll do is we'll zoom right in and we can take a look. I will crank up the blur, and you can see that now we've got the edge of the face and we've got a halo around it, and a bit of the inside is faded as well. So when we apply blur equally to the inside and outside of our key. If we make the IO ratio negative, we apply the blur to the inner edge of the key. And what you'll see is that that halo comes in and we start to lose the inside edge of the key. And conversely, if I drag it up, it will expand the key outwards and we start to blur further and further outside. It starts to apply the entire blur just to this edge going outwards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this back down to a sensible value, and then I'm going to drag in until I just about lose the edge bit of that halo. And that's going to make a nice, better edge for my key. So next we have morph operation. Now morph operation is a bit like applying a matte choker if you're familiar with green screen. We can use it to expand or contract the edges of our key. We can use it to either fill in little gaps in the middle of the key or even expand them outwards and make them bigger. We want to choose our morph operation for this. Now I've got lots of little gaps in here that want to be filled in. I've got kind of a gap on the nose, on the teeth, on the lips down here. I've got this highlight on the knuckle. All kinds of chattery nonsense in the hair. So where it says shrink, I'm going to choose closing, and this is going to start closing in these gaps. What I can do then is I can drag in the morph radius. It might take a little bit, but you see how all of those gaps within the key are now being filled in, and we've got a much stronger key here. The lips, the eyes, everything. It looks for holes surrounded, black gaps surrounded by white and tries to fill them in. I'm not going to get these bits of the hair in up here. In fact, they look as though they're quite saturated, so I might just tweak this. They're just very yellow. That was the problem there. That's fine. Now we can go back and we can tweak our other controls as much as we like. We don't have to start again or anything. So now we're getting a pretty solid key. Let's take a look. So bits of chatter around the edge. Now these very dark bits Yeah, we're not going to get those. And I don't want to pull... actually, no, we are going to get those. I tell a complete lie. We just need to garbage map these bits out. So, bits of chatter, but we can fix those next. So, we've also got shadow, midtone, and highlights. And what these do is they make the key more or less transparent. So, more transparent if we drag to the left, more opaque if we drag to the right, in different parts of the tonal range within the qualified region. So if I drag shadows to the right, the shadows in our key are going to get more opaque. If I drag midtones to the left, our midtones are going to fade out. To the right, they're going to get boosted. And highlights to the left, the highlights will fade out, or to the right, they will get boosted again. I didn't have these controls when I first started to use HSL, so it took me a while to get a feel for these. In this case, I don't really need them that much. I might push shadows up. Well, if I do that, I get the stuff on the left, so I don't really need to use these for this key. But they can be useful, especially if we're having issues, highlights in the hair or shadows, which just aren't playing ball. We can use these sliders to attack parts of the key and make sure that it behaves. I might just put the morph radius up a touch more and make sure I get the lips there. Now finally, we have denoise. Now denoise is going to be our saviour here, it always is. We drag up denoise and it attempts to calm down the chattering of the key. And now you can see we've got a much more stable edge. It can introduce some kind of halo issues if you're not careful with it, but it's a pretty good setting overall. About 35 should do it. Slight bits of chattering down there. But otherwise, look at that. We've got a pretty good stable key on here now. All we really need is to garbage mat this stuff out on the left. And then we have post filter, which kind of blurs things out and smooths it all out even more afterwards as well. I can put that up just a little bit. And we've now got a pretty good solid key on the skin. So we've made a big difference to our initial key. And now anything I do will just be within the qualified region. You can see how accurate this is. It's not quite getting all of the little stray hairs, but it's getting a lot. Well, it's getting almost everything here. So we've got a very good, very accurate key we can work with here. The last step is to combine our key with a power window to cut out these little bits of shadow here. So I'm just going to go into a power window, power curve, and I'm just going to draw a very loose garbage mat around the face, and voila, we've now got our finished qualification on the skin tones for the actor here. Lighting was quite difficult. These highlights are a bit much, but then he was in shadow otherwise. I'm okay with pushing these to get his skin tones to be in a good place. We could maybe do something about those in a different node. So what we can do now is we can just push the saturation of the skin up slightly. We can warm it up. Just make a very slight push to the skin tones, but we've warmed them up and just brought a little bit more life into them there. And this is a very, very common kind of correction to make. Right, so that's been a good look at the HSL key and the associated controls. By now you've downloaded quite a few things to play around and practice with. So go and play around with this tool, see what you can do. So click on through to the next lecture once you're ready.